Hello my beautiful watchers, and welcome to Lost in Adaptation, the YouTube review show dedicated to comparing films to the books they're based on. Some of you may remember that I said I wasn't going to redo any more of my old episodes.
Well, here's the thing, when I said that, I was lying.
In my defense, a bunch of beautiful watchers never got the chance to see my original Ender's Game video because of a bunch of copyright restrictions, which, in a very unique occurrence on YouTube, were entirely justified. Back when I was first getting started, I used to use the film's soundtrack as background music because, well, I was stupid and didn't fully understand how fair use worked. So, Orson Scott Card. Card is a world-renowned science fiction writer and considered to be a major influence on the genre. Too late to the game to be a part of the grandfathers or fathers of modern science fiction generations, he could still be considered the stepbrother of modern science fiction.
What are you doing?
Born in the United States in 1951, he began his career as an editor before writing his own novels, and like a lot of people now recognized to be geniuses in literature, he was thoroughly rejected by several publishers before finding his first big success. But the success came, and he's been one of the titans of sci-fi ever since. Oh, and he's a complete raving homophobe. Like, since the 90s, he's often been the fucking poster boy for homophobia. He's publicly denounced, campaigned against, and written essays criticizing the legalization of gay marriage, claiming it would destroy the sanctity of marriage, traditional family values, and maybe even the US government itself. His unrestrained bigotry is often attributed to his devotion to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, though, funnily enough, Card has not always been entirely popular with the church either, receiving criticism for, I kid you not, plagiarizing the Book of Mormon in his 5-book series known as the Homecoming Saga. Card has claimed not to be a political conservative to Ben Shapiro after he accepted an invitation to appear on his talk show, so take that claim for what it's worth. I have to admit, I was slightly hesitant about doing this video again because, well, I've refused to engage with the work of other bigoted writers for reasons I feel I have to perpetually reiterate. But I eventually decided they weren't comparable situations. Card has already lost his war for credibility when it comes to his beliefs. You would be hard-pushed to find anyone who's read his work or even knows that he exists who doesn't also consider him a massive wanker, and this has been true for quite some time now.
He is freaking crazy and just a dick. He's a dick.
So yeah, as long as you guys keep in mind that I am not encouraging you to buy his books, I feel safe sharing my honest opinion on them. Even if I make them sound really interesting, please do not do anything that will give Orson Scott Card more money. Not that I'm endorsing piracy, of course. Piracy is bad. Only very naughty boys, girls, and especially naughty non-binaries pirate things so that homophobic asshats don't get their money and use it for evil. Okay, now that that's out of the way, Ender's Game began life as a short story in Analog Science Fiction and Fact magazine in 1977. After its popularity, Card expanded it into a novel that was published in 1985, where it became his breakthrough book, winning both a Hugo and Nebula Award, two of the most prestigious awards in literature. Overly simplified, it's a dark science fiction about a child genius named Ender who agrees to attend a space school to learn how to be a super admiral and command the United Forces of Earth against an invasion of supposedly bloodthirsty aliens, and is eventually tricked into believing that his final exam is a simulated war game, only to discover that it was all real the whole time, and he had actually just destroyed an entire planet and done a genocide of an entire species. Card would go on to write several direct sequels, spin-off series, spin-offs of the spin-offs, and then a whole extended universe of prequels, sequels, and other stories, most of which were reasonably successful. One thing I was personally constantly blown away by regarding his work was how insanely good he was at predicting the future. In a novel first conceived in the 70s, he almost perfectly described the internet, social media, the effect that social media had on politics, and personal touchscreen wireless-enabled computers that people would carry on them at all times. He even guessed that these devices would be named by updating the meaning of a pre-existing word. The only thing he got wrong was which word, dubbing them desks instead of phones, tablets, or pads. Like, is this guy a fucking wizard? Does an irrational fear of the gays give you the ability to see the future? Wait, is that why he's scared of the gays? Are the gays planning something? I mean, I for one welcome our new gay overlords. Just remember who tried to be a good ally when you guys are in charge, okay? Card's religious bigotry definitely wormed its way into his writing in the sequel novels, but this first one is relatively chill on the Jesus front. I mean, not entirely. Ender figuratively dies for all our sins after all, and one of his happiest childhood memories was his mother praying by his bedside, but compared to his later work, it is positively subtle, I promise you. I should mention that despite how impressed I was regarding his future clairvoyance, and as ironic as it's going to make the next 30 or so minutes of me complaining that the film didn't do them justice, I actually didn't like these books very much, and it's not because Card's a piece of shit. They are just no fucking fun to read. If enjoyment's not what you look for in books, then have at them, but I have enough shit in life stressing me out already without reading an entire series set in a universe populated exclusively by irredeemably horrible people. They are all of them, just the worst. Fuck every single one of these characters. Card apparently rejected all offers made for the film adaptation rights all through the 80s and 90s due to an unwillingness to give up creative control, eventually submitting his own script to Warner Bros. In 2003. David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, the future showrunners for Game of Thrones, were hired to collaborate, but this evidently didn't make it to production. Card went on to write multiple other scripts for an Ender's Game film, and one was eventually picked up in 2009 by Odalot Entertainment, though not long afterwards Gavin Hood of X-Men Origins Wolverine fame was brought on as a screenwriter and director, and by the sounds of things rewrote a lot of what Card had contributed. Asa Butterfield was cast as the titular Ender, Haley Steinfeld, Aramis Knight, and Moses Arias as his schoolmates, and Ben Kingsley, Nozo Anozie, Viola Davis, and Harrison Ford as his instructors. Not surprisingly, Card's open bigotry resulted in multiple boycotts of the film, and a brief online trend where people made amusing suggestions for a better use of one's time than seeing Ender's Game, which I remember being quite funny. In my opinion, people did not miss much, but before I start tearing this film apart, I do want to acknowledge some of its undeniable qualities. First of all, holy fucking shit, those special effects are flawless. Look at how insanely beautiful Earth looks. Look at those real looking spaceships. Look at all just the space stuff. Oh, that's some good space stuff. The soundtrack, which I shall resist infringing upon this time around, was equally impressive. Considering the age of the cast, the acting is surprisingly solid. There's really only one person in the entire film giving a bad performance, and ironically, it's the biggest name attached to the film. What the heck, Indy? One can only assume this was a paycheck movie for Ford, judging by how bored he looks all the way through it. I have never seen an A-list actor snooze his way through a movie like this before.
The purpose of this war is to prevent all future wars. Your training begins first thing tomorrow morning.
There's greatness in him, sir.
And a killer instinct too, I hope.
Absolutely.
You can see him losing interest in scenes where he doesn't have any lines.
If either side gets one cadet through their enemy's gate unharmed.
And he's disassociated. Mr. Ford, you're on set. The guy clearly gave so little of a shit about this movie, I'm honestly surprised he let them give him a haircut for it. Alright, just to summarize everything so far, author bad, book good, though not my personal cup of tea, and film pretty. Now we can talk adaptation. Okay, so in the not-too-distant future, Andrew Ender Wiggin is dealing with being the third child in a world that has introduced strict laws about only having 2 children in a desperate attempt to control Earth's overpopulation issues. Laws that have taken on a strong social aspect, making him unpopular simply for existing. However, his parents were actually asked by the government to have a third child for extremely special reasons. Several decades before, an insectoid alien race known as the Formics had attempted to invade Earth, killing millions of people. Their superior technology and vastly more efficient tactics made them nearly undefeatable, were it not for a genius commander known as Mesa Rackham, who somehow, and the details are a closely guarded secret, defeated the buggers in one devastating battle. All these years later, the now semi-united nations of Earth still fully expect having to go another round with the Formics and are attempting to fight find a child gifted enough in intelligence, empathy, and chutzpah to one day command their fleets in the next war. Ender's older brother Peter had the brains and cunning but had proven too aggressive, and his older sister Valentine was just as smart but too kind and gentle. So, Mr. and Mrs. Wiggin had been encouraged to have the taboo third child to see if they could get the porridge just right this time. Ender starts the story in a military program that's designed to test his aptitude for this world-saving destiny, making all of his rivals look silly with how much better he is at everything, despite having a fucking computer drilled into the back of his head that lets his commanders read his thoughts and emotions. It does get removed pretty quickly, but still, holy shit, that seems entirely unnecessary. Anyway, Stinson, the school bully, attacks Ender but ends up being the one who gets a beating. Believing he's out of the running because of the monitor removal, he's consoled by Valentine before their evil-minded, jealous older brother walks in and starts acting all murdery, an unfortunately common occurrence in their childhood. However, that night they're visited by a Colonel Graff of the Earth International Fleet, and he offers Ender a position in their prestigious battle school, laying it on pretty thick about Ender potentially being the only person who can save mankind. Alas, the second that Ender signs up, the manipulative Graff starts intentionally singling him out for ridicule and isolating him from his schoolmates, this being part of his plan to turn Ender into the super commander that Earth needs, forcing him to believe that no one will ever fight his battles for him or parent him in any way. Battle School itself is relatively book accurate, a large space station orbiting Earth dedicated to training would-be admirals that's built around a massive central chamber with no gravity. After a period of general training and education, students are assigned to an army headed by an older student commander and pitted against each other in the battle room, armed with special light guns that can freeze the joints of or completely disable the high-tech suits they wear. Ender has to deal with another would-be bully at first, a lad called Bernard, but neutralizes him with some tactical high-tech message passing in class, which earns him the allegiance of the other outcasts of the school. He's encouraged to play a weird video game in his free time that utilizes a form of AI to adapt to him and provide a personalized experience, eventually showing him an image of Peter and forcing him to confront his fear that he might end up just as evil as him. Fun fact, in the book sequels, thousands of years later, this AI would gain sapience and become Ender's friend. Anyways, it presents him with a no-win scenario to test how he deals with frustration, in which a giant demands that he drink from one of two cups, but both result in instant death. However, Ender elects to murder the giant instead, overcoming what's supposed to be a dead end. He's promoted way early to Salamander Army, which pisses off its current commander, Bonito Bonzo de Madrid. Taking an immediate dislike to Ender, he orders him to hang back in every battle, an order that Ender would eventually disobey, saving Salamander Army from defeat, but earning him even more anger from Bonzo. Ender's eventually given command of his own army, the previously discontinued Dragon, which had a reputation for bad luck, and given the dregs of the school to fill it. Despite these handicaps, Ender wins every battle and continues to do so as Graff and the other instructors start to change the rules to make it harder for him. Bonzo eventually feels pushed too far and attempts to ambush Ender in the showers to punish him for all the humiliation, but once again it's the assailant who ends up getting the beating. Ender's battle school education culminates in the dragons facing two armies at once who had also been given a head start into the battle room. Ender wins this too and graduates immediately afterwards, but is so burned out he's taken back to Earth, and Valentine is pressured into talking him into continuing his career in world saving. Somewhat re-energized, Ender is taken to the International Fleet's command center and discovers his team for his final exams is to be comprised of all of his besties from battle school. Not only that, the legendary commander Mesa Rackham is still alive and is to be his tutor and examiner. Finally allowed to know the full story regarding his new teacher's defeat of the Formics, Ender discovers he destroyed a seemingly random ship and the entire invasion spontaneously died at once, which could mean that, like the ants they resemble, they have a queen who does all the thinking for the rest of the hive, and if he can take her out, all the other Formics in the immediate vicinity go with her. He's also told that it's not the Formics invading Earth this time around, it's the humans invading the Buggers' territory in a preemptive counterstrike. And to give them an edge, they've invented a new super weapon called the Molecular Disruption Device, or the Little Doctor, that, as the name implies, can disrupt the molecular bonds holding matter together, and depending on the size of the target, cause a chain reaction that spreads outwards to collapse everything around it too. Ender's final test to see if he's worthy of commanding the fleets when they arrive is to be a series of intense battle simulations mirroring what he's going to have to deal with in the actual war, with the digital enemy Formics being controlled by Mesa Rackham. Despite some setbacks, Ender wins every match and even wins the final battle that appears to have been made intentionally in impossible at first as he's outnumbered thousands to one, but beat the system by using the little doctor to destroy the Formic's homeworld and all of the queens at once. Immediately afterwards, Endo's informed that none of this was a game after all, and he'd actually just won the war for real, which is good news for humanity in general, but isn't great for our boy, because he now has to deal with the crushing guilt of having unknowingly committed xenocide. Sometime later, he's drawn to a particular landscape on a Formic world when he notices that it looks just like a setting that appeared in his video game, and theorizes that this was the result of the Formics trying to communicate with him. Exploring, he finds a queen egg that could one day repopulate the species. Ender vows to keep it safe and explore the universe until he can find a safe spot to undo the harm he did. The film does a relatively decent job of recreating the original bait and switch, where it starts out as a pretty clear-cut Independence Day-esque battle against bug-eyed aliens, but devolves into a tragedy, both for the toll it took on Ender and how ultimately unnecessary all of it was. It's a lot less subtle than the book regarding how it conveys that the Formics weren't so bad after all, but it is made clear that they weren't intending to mount another invasion and regretted all the bloodshed before now, but being a hive mind that communicated telepathically, they had no concept of any other form of communication, so couldn't tell the humans this. So here's the thing. That's kind of it. That's a pretty spot-on synopsis of the book's story, or at least Ender's part in it. If copy-pasting the plot section of the book's Wikipedia page into the script was all it took to be a good adaptation, they'd be laughing. But this film just isn't Card's book, and here's why. Ender's great tactical genius is simplified in the film, resulting in a low-key continuous request that we just take their word for it that he's single-handedly rewriting the space warfare book as he goes. The most we ever get is a few scenes where he yells military-sounding gibberish out at high speed in the hopes that this will make him sound super smart.
Squadrons 43 through 57, split squadron, Foxtrot 3889. Think, compensate for the pull of planet G8 and go full throttle.
Now, to be fair, most works of fiction that involve a savant genius of some sort require a similar suspension of disbelief, but that's one of the things that made the book so impressive. It didn't. Card made what seemed obvious to Ender obvious to the reader too, without making everyone else in the story seem completely stupid, which makes it all the more frustrating when the film fails to follow suit. For example, Ender's revolutionary idea to think of the zero-G battle room as a vertical battleground instead of a horizontal one, and orientate his army so the enemy is down below them. This provided an instant psychological advantage of feeling like they had the high ground, encouraged them to use all of the available directions around obstacles equally, and made themselves a significantly harder target for the enemy to hit, as all they could see was their feet approaching. This seems so obvious once you think about it, but it also makes perfect sense that a species that's only just started having to adapt to zero gravity on the regular after 300,000 years of conducting warfare on a planet wouldn't have immediately grasped it. Now, in the film, Ender does throw out this idea in conversation with Bean, but never gets around to explaining any of the associated advantages. The only thing we ever get in relation to this is a slightly lame joke from Bean.
I like it. Like they're a bug to be crushed under our feet.
Exactly.
Which implies either the writers didn't understand why Ender suggested it, or felt an explanation would take up too much time that could be better spent watching Ender lock eyes suggestively with Petra. It also implies that Bean, the only person in the book's universe arguably smarter than Ender, didn't understand the complexities of the idea either, beyond it would make us feel tall, lol. Either way, you'll notice they never actually, do it. However, all this pales in comparison to how much they dumbed down Ender's final masterstroke in Battle School when he beat two opposing armies at once, the trick that comes back again in his final confrontation with the Formics. In the book, he knew he just couldn't take on twice as many entrenched opponents, so he launched a big, confusing diversion attack and sent a small squad of kids around the back of the room to perform the winning ceremony at the enemy gate, something that was supposed to just be a formality after the enemy was defeated, but still ended the fight and registered the win for him. Book ended Ender revolutionized the game, then he perfected the game, then, when they made the game impossible for him, he broke the game, winning the match by exploiting a weakness in the rules devised by the teachers. The school itself had declared itself his enemy, so he defeated the school, not the army. Later, when he faced insurmountable odds in the battle for the Formic homeworld, he pulled a similar trick. He simply won the fight instead of fighting the enemy, destroying both fleets by using the MD on the planet and making a chain reaction so big it destroyed everything. In the film, however, his crowning glory of battle mastery is Meat Shield. He uses a meat shield to win at battle school, then he does it again to win the war. That's the stratagem the rest of the combined military leaders of the world could apparently never hope to think of with their tiny, non-child genius brains. Meat shield. If you put things in the way of the thing you don't want them to shoot, then they can't shoot it. That's it. That's the play. I try to severely limit my use of the word cringe, but there's really no other way to describe how I felt every time Ender had that big happy grin on his face in Battle School. The Battle School segment of the Ender's Game novel is almost a psychological horror story. Colonel Graff and the other instructors made it their singular purpose to wear Ender down physically and psychologically in order to mold him into the superweapon they needed, to push him past the point where any other human child would break down completely and lose their grasp on sanity. And if he did break, then, well, he just wasn't who they needed. This is a story about people who, rightly or wrongly, felt justified in permanently damaging a young man's mental health because they needed him to be a certain way in order for him to save the human race. It wasn't a situation that resulted in a lot of happy smiley faces and knowing looks exchanged with his tormentors. What's weird though is the dialogue seems to suggest that they are in fact pushing him as hard as he was pushed in the book. It's just not reflected in the rest of the film. And there's an awful lot of examples of this sort of thing, suggesting that perhaps some of the failures of adaptations didn't occur in the writing process, but were maybe due to a breakdown of communication or understanding between the writers and the rest of the production. The result is an off-putting dissonance between what's being said, which is usually more in keeping with the book, and what we're being shown in relation to it, which matches neither the book nor this dialogue. I can list a whole bunch of them for you right now. Bean claims the other launchies exploring the battle room for the first time are failing to grasp the orientationless nature of Zero-G.
These guys are still trying to stay up the way they came in.
But as soon as they cut to them, you can clearly see that they're doing no such thing. They're all flying in different directions and pointing every which way up. As I said a moment ago, Ender's game-changing idea to orientate the enemy's gate downwards in Null G is never visually acknowledged by the film. They played around with orientation enough to show that they knew it was an option, but when it came to the actual battles, they always shot the battle room horizontally. To be book accurate, this scene should have looked like this. This bites the film in the arse again later when both the human and bugger space fleets conveniently orientate themselves to an imaginary up when they battle. Like almost every science fiction film or TV show ever made has done this, but if you're going to specifically remind your audience that there is no up or down in space, and present this information in a way that mocks the people this hasn't automatically occurred to, then surely it should be reflected in the film visually just a tiny bit at some point. In the book, Ender accidentally killed Stinson because he kept kicking him while he was down. He didn't find out about this until years later. What made it so worrying was he wasn't doing it because he was enraged or frightened. At 6 years old, he made the calculated decision to make an example out of Stilson so no other bullies would ever mess with him, causing grievous bodily harm on someone in a state of near complete calm. Once again, the dialogue seems to support the book version of events, as Ender defends his actions to Colonel Graff by claiming he was trying to win all of the next fights as well, but if you look at the actual scene itself, Butterfield was obviously directed to scream and cry and look completely out of control of his emotions, which contradicts all of it. Mazer Rackham claims he's going to be running the simulations Ender has to overcome, making their extreme difficulty believable, but during the final battle, he's in the observation booth, like he's right in the center between Graff and the Stratego. He's right there! Ender can see that he's not in his own command room controlling his opponents. Ender's supposed to be the greatest military mind in human history, and he doesn't see the flaw in this picture? Okay, this next one might be a little pedantic and unnecessarily nerdy, but the film takes a moment to explain exactly how the MD device works. Particle beams shatter molecular bonds and cause a chain reaction. In layman's terms, everything it hits disintegrates, and the shockwave disintegrates all the things around it. And yet, when they use it on the planet, it just makes it all volcano-y and stuff. I'm not claiming to be a bloody physicist here, or that the science of the little doctor makes any sense. I wouldn't know. I have a Bachelor of fucking Arts, and I'm not saying I don't know why they did it. It looks cooler this way. We've been able to see a planet explode since 1977. They wanted something with a little more detail, and that's fine. All I'm saying is they clearly said it does one thing with visual aids no less, then it does something else. This whole film seems to be made up of them saying one thing, then showing us something completely different. The film's version of interstellar travel is confusing, which is deeply unfortunate because it was 1, fairly simple in the book, and 2, a huge part of the plot depends on it being simple. In the book, faster than light communication exists, but faster than light travel does not. Humans and Formic ships can go close enough to the speed of light for time to slow down for the ship's occupants, but from the perspective of the rest of the universe, it still takes decades to reach anything. The International Fleet Command Center was in Eros in the book, one of the larger asteroids in our solar system, but it still took several months for Ender and Graf to reach it. The human invasion fleets had left as soon as they were constructive, which was about half a century before Ender was even born, and they'd been trying to find a perfect commander ever since. Apparently due to extreme bad luck, only finding their boy literally right before the bell rang, a few years before they were supposed to arrive at their destination. My point is, the timing of it all is super locked in. A 13-year-old boy is commanding the United Forces of Earth because they had to launch their invasion right away before the Formics could send a third one of their own, and it's arriving now. There is no more time for Ender to get any older, better trained, or more experienced. It's a little convoluted, but there it is. In the film, I have no fucking idea what's going on. Less than halfway through, they establish beyond a shadow of a doubt that the IF assault fleet is due to arrive in Formic space in 28 days. A timeline is clearly confirmed. The Ford Command Center is now on a planet on the edge of Formic space that the humans had supposedly annexed 30 years earlier. Why the supposedly vastly superior armed aliens had never bothered chasing them off in the past 3 decades is never addressed, but whatever. The point is, Ender goes there. That's where he commands the fleet from. It's a whole-ass other planet in a whole-ass other solar system, and Ender has time to be promoted to his own army, lead them to multiple victories, beat up a short king in the showers, finish school, take a vacation, and travel there from Earth in 28 days. So answer me this, if interstellar travel is possible in significantly less time than a free trial of Netflix, then what was the fucking point of rushing Ender's training? Why did they launch the fleet before he had even graduated school? Who's in charge of this plan, Leroy Jenkins? And once again, the visuals of the film clash with everything we're being told. They show Ender in some sort of suspended animation during the trip, and the fast-cranked editing suggests that this was necessary because it was such a long voyage, but because we know the timeline, we know the entire journey couldn't have been more than a few days at most. A lot of Ender's schoolmates, friends, and future subordinates had their roles greatly diminished, which is fairly normal and basically inevitable in film adaptations. You just don't have time to cover everyone. According to Card, Bean had a much larger role in his version of the script, taking a buddy movie approach and incorporating scenes from the spin-off novel that he starred in, but once Hood took over, Bean's role was diminished in favor of Petra. So Petra came away with the most screen time, but unfortunately the film used a lot of it to imply a budding romance between her and Ender. There were in fact no romance plots in Ender's game. In the sequel books, Petra ended up in relationships with 2 major characters, but neither of them were him. Bean got what was left over sidekick character development wise, which, as it happens, actually brings him up to about the same amount he got in the book. We learned a lot about him when he got his own spin-off series, but despite becoming a POV character about halfway through the book, he spends most of the story fairly underdeveloped and living in Ender's shadow. Ding, roll credits. It's worth noting that due to being a mad scientist's genetic experiment, Bean started life unnaturally tiny. Not just smaller because he's younger, really small. But he also never stops growing. His brain gets exponentially smarter as he ages because it keeps getting larger, but the growth of his body to match it will end up killing him young. Technically, none of this is relevant to Ender's Game, aside from the choice not to cast a particularly short actor. Not for Bean, anyway. Which brings me onto Bonzo, who's very accurate to his book counterpart, except for, you know, no shade on the short kings, none whatsoever. Arias is 5'1" of solid acting chops, but Bonzo was supposed to be much bigger than Ender. That's why it was significant that Ender ended up kicking his ass so hard he died. Bonzo was tall, handsome, intimidating, charismatic, and commanding. Everything a great leader should be, except that he was a very mediocre strategist. It was sort of a lesson in looks being deceiving. Spanish Alexander the Great just wasn't that great. Apparently even Arias was somewhat in the dark about this particular casting choice.
I guess the director saw something different in me, and the dynamic between Ender, Asa, who's an incredible actor, and me just really worked. I don't know what it was,
The book version of him was obsessed with Spanish honor, which is what led to him being unable to forgive Ender for being so much better than him, but also what saved Ender in the end, as he chose to 1v1 him instead of having his whole gang of murderous thugs fight too. All that complexity seems to have been whittled down to, I guess, a Napoleon complex in the film. In other circumstances, I'd be like, okay, fine, they're just trying something new, but it's especially weird because there is a character who is supposed to be really small, and they didn't make him really small, so why are they making him the character who wasn't supposed to be really small? I don't get it. Bonzo's ultimate fate is left somewhat ambiguous in the film, leaving off on him getting surgery. Bro was hella dead in the book. Ender did the thing with the nose bone being shoved up into the brain. Was that ever real or just an urban myth? I think Eli lost the most by being regulated to a background character. He and Ender are much closer in the novel, and he's directly involved in a lot of the Battle School dramas, but most of his contributions to the plot were reassigned to Bean or Petra. Now clench thy buttocks, my beautiful watchers, because the next bit's going to be uncomfortable as fuck. Eli is black in the novel. This is known for certain, mostly because he's described as such, but partly because Ender calls him the N-word to his face as an icebreaker in their first conversation. They grinned, then Ender said, "Better invite Bernard." Eli cocked his eyebrow. Oh? And Shen, that little butt wiggler. Ender decided that Eli was joking. Hey, we can't all be... I'm not saying that. Eli grinned. "My grandpa would have killed you for that. My great-great-grandpa would have sold him first." Bonding through the casual exchange of racial slurs, one aspect of Card's future I'm quite relieved didn't come to pass. For most people. The film version of Bernard is oversimplified to the extreme. He's initially an antagonist, but Ender wins him over with his even-handedness, and he eventually becomes a trusted member of his command team. In the novel, he's a sad reminder that sometimes you can do everything right, but some arseholes will still be arseholes at the end of the day. Book Ender did even more for Bernard than his film counterpart, making sure he wasn't outcast completely from the group when he clapped back on his bullying, and including him in multiple opportunities for advancement within the school. And after all this, the ungrateful bastard still turned on him and joined the mob that was trying to ambush him in the showers with the intention of beating the genius out of him. He's also French in the novel, which might explain that. Ender started the book at 6 years old and ended it at 13. A damn near impossible casting challenge, though I wouldn't have put it past them to try to cram that into the 28-day timeline as well. I am a little confused by the film's use of the name Ender. They seem to treat it like it's his middle name as opposed to a nickname that he self-identified with so hard it eventually caught on.
Andrew Wiggin. Andrew Ender Wiggin. Please report to the infirmary.
The film found an answer to a question about the game that was bugging me in the book. Card seemed to alternate between describing it like it was a high-tech virtual reality, as Ender seemed to actually experience the goings-on, but other times definitely described things happening on a screen. The film explains this away by claiming the game is being controlled by a direct and, I guess, wireless link to Ender's mind. This also led to them flipping the way that the Formix tried to communicate with him at the end. Originally, they pulled images of the landscapes that he saw in the game from his memories and terraformed an area on one of their planets to look like it, but now they're sending the image of the place to him, and it's manifesting in the game through his mind link. Though the thought does occur, if the International Fleet has mastered direct mind control over electronics, why the fuck are they just using it for a Nintendo Switch and forcing Ender to wave his hands around like a fucking mime on crack when he's trying to control an entire war? But that's far from the biggest inconsistency in this bloody film. When Ender was banned from participating in Salamander Army's battles, he formed a practice group mostly comprised of his former Launchy friends to practice tactics in his free time, showing that he always gravitated to a leadership position no matter where you put him. This is whittled down to just him and Petra hanging out, and I do believe I've made my disapproval of that whole thing quite clear, thank you. There were actually 2 Formic invasions in the book, and the fighting in both took place in outer space. Mazer Rackham won his victory with a small fleet near Saturn. I'm not sure what to make of the idea that he was a fighter pilot in a normal, atmospheric plane. Like, how exactly was he commanding the battle from there? And it makes the opening look suspiciously like the ending of Independence Day.
Oh, boys! I'm back!
I'll get more into this later, but Ender didn't find the Formic Queen egg right next to the IF Forward Command base. It's kind of wild to me that the film wrote in a still-living Formic Queen within walking distance of the building the Navy was using to house all of its top brass, that apparently doesn't even have locks on its doors. No wonder these chucklefucks needed a child to lead them if they didn't even think to check the immediate vicinity for their greatest enemy. Card has mentioned that in every script that he wrote for this film, he always assumed that the audience already knew the big twists, that the humans were the invaders this time around, and that Ender was commanding for real in his final exam, figuring that the book's fanbase would be a significant bulk of the audience. This philosophy is reflected in several parts of the film, and I might have forgiven it if it were just the audience they weren't trying to fool, but as mentioned, they also didn't seem to be bothering to hide it from Ender either. He's right there! Ah! The single biggest omission of the film was the only non-Ender related arc, that of his siblings Peter and Valentine. While they had washed out of the Save the World program for being too aggressive and not aggressive enough respectively, they were still just as smart as Ender and now had nothing to do. So Peter just sort of decides to take over the world? And then he fucking does. He convinces Valentine to help him, and they start making names for themselves on social media by using fake adult personas to have diametrically opposed bad faith public political arguments. I must now confess to you, my beautiful watchers, that in the original version of this review, which I think I made in 2015, I mocked the idea that someone could gain political power by shitposting online. Card made a fool of me without even knowing I existed, because 9 years later it is not only possible, it is more or less a requirement. Valentine kind of loathes herself for letting Peter talk her into this and fears what giving him political power would do to the world. Mainly because, in addition to physically and emotionally abusing his siblings, Valentine had found evidence that Peter spent his free time trapping little woodland critters and torturing them to death for funsies. Meaning he wasn't just a bully, he was straight up psychotic. But Peter was just really good at getting people to do what he wanted. Interestingly, Peter insisted that he take on the persona of the compassionate progressive by the name of Locke, while Valentine write for the character of Demosthenes, a reactionary conservative and fearmongerer. Valentine believed that he did this because she would always need his help writing so far out of her wheelhouse, so she wouldn't be able to go rogue on him, and because he assumed that the obviously much more intelligent and noble Locke would be the one that the people of the world flocked to as their savior, so he wanted to keep that role for himself. This proves to be the one thing that he miscalculated. Locke gained a substantial following, but Valentine's Demosthenes, the persona that spewed hate disguised as politics, who demonized the other, accused his opponents of being short-sighted while constantly spouting obviously contradictory fallacies, gained a massive army of idiot pseudo-intellectuals almost immediately and started to get attention from the drama-hungry media long before the same was offered to Locke. After a while, terrifying even Valentine and Peter, people they thought were reasonably intelligent, like their parents, started parroting the words of Demosthenes, seemingly growing blind to his obvious flaws. It turned out to be so much easier to become online famous by sowing hate instead of wisdom. 1985, people. I for one say we burn Card at the stake because this is just getting scary. Anyways, when Ender wins his war, Valentine uses a bunch of proof that she's collected on Peter that would out him as a squirrel crucifying lunatic to force him not to use Ender in his political games like he originally intended, and leaves Earth with her little brother to colonize the Formic worlds. Even without Ender though, Peter gets his wish and rides his Locke persona fame to being elected as the new hegemon of Earth. The first time I read this book, I was like, wait, so the abusive, psychotic megalomaniac got everything he wanted at the end while the hero exiles himself riddled with PTSD? It's a bit of a fucked up ending. I guess Card kind of realized this too because Peter gets a pretty thorough redemption arc in these spin-off books that cover what happened on Earth while Ender was traveling to the New Worlds. It's revealed he actually had to work really hard to reunite the planet, and you could make the argument that Peter pretended to be a hero for so long that he eventually became one. His vivisection hobby isn't exactly retconned, but it is recontextualized somewhat as a point of shame for the elder Wiggin brother. And to be grudgingly fair to Card, he did plant a tiny seed of suggestion regarding Peter not being a complete monster deep down right at the start of Ender's Game. Card making two genius teenagers laying the groundwork for world domination, the distant B-plot was already an interesting choice, and what it sets up doesn't pay off until later books, so it's not super surprising they didn't feel like they could incorporate this into the film. One thing that I'm not particularly sorry was left out of the film was, Rose the Nose, the Jewish commando at Battle School, and the brief but deeply uncomfortable lore dump that came with him that acknowledges that anti-Semitism is a thing, but seems to low-key imply that it might be justified because Jewish people are routinely handed a disproportionately high amount of political power and positions in the international military compared to anyone else, and I don't know, just a lot of it comes off as prejudice towards the Jewish masquerading as compliments, you know? That might just be me though. The film wraps up fairly quickly once Ender gets his little cocoon baby and commandeers a tiny spaceship to go and explore the universe, I guess, alone. With the way that interstellar travel works in this film, I'm guessing this will take, what, a month, maybe two? I kid you not, the last few pages of the book span thousands of years. Almost amusingly, immediately after Ender won the war, like the very second that word reached home that they weren't in immediate danger of being wiped out by an alien race anymore, the alliance of all the countries of Earth fell apart and the entire planet descended into all-out war. Ender didn't take part in it though, as Valentine, who was now politically savvy enough to know that every faction on Earth would pull at Ender until they tore him apart, strong-armed him into joining her on a colony ship that was part of an effort to take advantage of the planets that the Formics weren't using anymore. He and Valentine helped oversee the establishment of this human colony, and it was on this distant planet, decades after the war in relative time, that he found the hills shaped like his fantasy game and the egg hidden away for him. He and his sister eventually left this world as well and started continuously traveling between the new planets, extending their lives over thousands of years of human development while looking for a safe spot to hatch his new baby Formic. Okay, serious spoilers for the sequel novels. Skip ahead if you don't want to hear them, but I just wanted to share with you that he eventually decides that the perfect spot is on a planet populated by devout Catholic humans and little pig people who consider it the highest honor to be tortured to death so they can become trees and don't understand why humans don't appreciate it when they do this to them. Said planet is also quarantined from the rest of the universe because of a super deadly plague, so great choice there, Ender. Fun fact, they eventually cure it by temporarily traveling to a pocket dimension where people's will controls physics and simply wishing a vaccine into existence. This accidentally brings Peter back to life and makes a younger copy of Valentine, which eventually kills Ender because there's only enough life force for 2 of the 3 of them, and he had the lowest will to live. This is punctuated by stories about Ender's before-mentioned AI girlfriend and a planet populated exclusively by Asian people with OCD who have been tricked into thinking it's spiritual enlightenment. I think it's pretty safe to say that Card had gotten pretty fucking weird by this point. Final thoughts. I think the best way to describe this is it's a very surface level adaptation. They got the basic outline of the story right, but failed to dig any deeper than that. The conflict between the book accurate dialogue and the visual effects team, who are apparently making a completely different fucking movie, combined with the inevitable plot holes that arise from trying to cram a 7-year story into less than a month, were the nails in the lid of the coffin, but the writer-director's clear lack of understanding of the story was ultimately what killed it. Hood appears to have been unwilling to commit to just how dark the story was regarding what the adults did to Ender, and unable to convey the character's genius, which is kind of the lad's whole thing. I think if I were a real fan of this book, this film would be quite upsetting for me, but as I'm not, I more see it as a fascinating example of how to take something exceptional, and without turning it into something completely different, still manage to turn it into something utterly forgettable. Gavin Hood sucked the life out of Ender more effectively than Colonel Graff could ever have hoped to. But I'm sure we can all take solace in remembering that even though this isn't the adaptation that Ender deserved, having his ideas rejected in favor of what turned out to be an extremely mediocre movie is exactly what we all hoped for Orson Scott Card. And as the film's underperformance at the box office stomped out any possible plans for sequels or spin-offs, this is all he's likely to get for the foreseeable future. Thanks for joining me on this journey to Schadenfreude, my beautiful watchers. Just an FYI, I've recently been uploading a lot of exclusive content to my Patreon page to encourage more people to join it, so if you find yourself craving more Dom, be sure to check that out. Don't forget to throw a like at your boy, and I hope you'll tune in next time.